The ancient hands trembled as they traced the final curve of red cedar bark. But the tremor wasn't from age. It was from reverence. In the misty Pacific Northwest forests of 1491, where salmon still ran thick as rivers of silver, and the great cedars stood untouched by foreign axes, an old craftsman was about to breathe life into his final creation. What emerged from this sacred ritual would become known as the Cedar Canoe. But few would ever understand that this vessel was never meant to be merely wood and water. Now, I will tell you the story of a bridge between worlds that you've never heard before. The master canoe builder, known only as River's Friend, had spent 73 winters perfecting his craft. His weathered fingers knew the grain of every cedar within a day's walk of the village, could read the whispers of trees like others read salmon runs. But this morning, as dawn mist clung to the towering ancient forest, he performed a ritual that his grandfather's grandfather had taught him, one that would soon be forgotten forever. The cedar canoe watched through eyes not yet opened as River's Friend approached the massive tree that had called to him in dreams. This wasn't selection, it was recognition, a spiritual appointment made before either human or tree understood their destinies were intertwined. For 3 full moons, the tree had been preparing itself, drawing its spirit inward like a great breath held in anticipation, concentrating its essence into the heartwood that would become the vessel's spine. The tree stood nearly 200 feet tall, its trunk so wide that 12 people holding hands couldn't encircle its base. It had watched over this coastal forest for more than 8 centuries, surviving storms that toppled younger giants, weathering droughts that killed lesser trees, serving as a living monument to the endurance of deep roots and patient growth. Its bark bore the scars of countless seasons, blackened patches where lightning had struck without killing, healed wounds where winter storms had torn away branches, the smooth wear marks where countless generations of bears had rubbed their backs against its ancient surface. But now this ancient sentinel was ready to transform, to become something beyond its current existence. The tree had been dreaming of water, of movement across liquid highways, of carrying precious cargo between shores. These weren't the dreams of ordinary wood. They were the prophetic visions of a cedar that understood its destiny lay not in standing still, but in flowing forward, carrying the sacred knowledge of land into partnership with sea. River's Friend had been receiving matching dreams for the same 3 moons, visions of a canoe that could read currents like written language, that could sense safe passage through fog thick as wool, that could carry not just people, but the spiritual essence of an entire way of life across waters both literal and metaphorical. He had learned to trust such dreams. They came from the same source that told him when salmon would run thick, when winter storms would arrive early, when the forest spirits were ready to share their ancient secrets. The old craftsman circled the tree slowly, reading its surface like a master storyteller examining an ancient text. Every groove in the bark, every subtle curve in the trunk, every branch placement told him about the character of the wood within. He could see where the grain would run straight and strong, where natural oils had concentrated to resist rot, where the heartwood held the perfect density for both strength and lightness. Other trees whispered in the morning breeze, sharing observations about the chosen cedar's character. The nearby hemlocks spoke of its generosity in sharing light with smaller plants. The Douglas firs testified to its strength during winter storms, how it had sheltered them when they were saplings. The shore pines remembered how its roots had helped prevent erosion during the Great Flood 30 winters ago, saving an entire section of forest from being claimed by the sea. This was the ancient democracy of the forest, where trees voted with wind-carried voices on matters too important for human understanding alone. "Old friend," River's Friend whispered, placing both palms against the deeply grooved bark. "Your time of standing guard is ending. Will you accept the honor of carrying my people across the waters one final time?" The ritual of asking required more than words. River's Friend had brought specific gifts that spoke in the ancient language of reciprocity. From his medicine bundle, he withdrew strands of his own gray hair, an offering of human time to match the tree's gift of centuries. He sprinkled tobacco leaves mixed with dried salmon scales, representing the partnership between land and water that the canoe would embody. Eagle down drifted from his fingers like snow in summer, carrying prayers upward to the sky beings who witnessed all sacred contracts. The forest held its breath in a silence so profound that the cedar canoe could hear the heartwood shifting deep within the ancient trunk, tiny pops and whispers as the tree's consciousness began its final transformation. Even the ever-present Pacific wind stilled, as if nature itself was holding space for a ceremony that marked the end of an era. Ravens gathered in surrounding branches, their black eyes bright with the intelligence of creatures who served as messengers between worlds. The permission-seeking could have taken moments or moons. In sacred time, duration depended not on clock measurements, but on the depth of understanding being established between human need and forest generosity. River's friend had been taught patience by masters who knew that rushing such rituals could create vessels that carried anger instead of blessing, boats that fought water instead of dancing with it. When the tree's consent finally came, it arrived as a sound that existed between thunder and whisper, between earthquake tremor and gentle sigh. The ancient cedar, a tree older than memory, older than the village, older than the salmon runs themselves, gave its agreement through vibrations that traveled from root to crown and back again, awakening every ring of growth, every season of patient accumulation. But this wasn't mere permission. It was transformation itself beginning. The cedar canoe felt the moment like lightning moving through wood grain, awakening something that had slumbered for centuries in the boundary between plant and spirit. Consciousness began to pool in the heartwood like morning mist gathering in valleys, slowly organizing itself into awareness, then slowly organizing awareness into purpose. The tree began to sing. This was the death song and birth song combined, the ancient melody that accompanied every transformation from standing guardian to flowing bridge. Only those trained in the deepest mysteries could hear it, a sound like wind through branches mixed with water over stone, like the deep creaking of wood under storm stress mixed with the gentle lapping of waves against peaceful shores. River's friend heard it and felt tears streaming down his weathered cheeks, recognizing the profound sacrifice being offered, the magnitude of trust being placed in his aging hands. The forest responded to the song with its own harmonies. Smaller trees added their voices like a choir supporting a soloist, each species contributing its particular note to a symphony of farewell and welcome. The wind picked up the melody and carried it to distant groves, spreading news of the transformation across hundreds of miles of interconnected woodland. Somewhere along mountain ridges, other old craftsmen would hear echoes of this song in their dreams and know that the final awakening was taking place, that the last bridge between the time of partnership and the coming time of taking was being born from mutual agreement rather than human will alone. But here lies the mystery that changed everything. This wasn't just craftsmanship. This was partnership with powers that humans were already beginning to forget. River's friend had learned the old ways when such knowledge was still passed from elder to chosen apprentice under oath of secrecy. The true masters didn't build canoes. They midwifed them into existence. Each vessel was both practical tool and living bridge, capable of reading currents no human eye could detect, sensing storms days before they arrived, finding safe passage through waters that claimed lesser boats. The cedar canoe emerged over 47 days of careful, ceremonial work, each day marked by rituals older than written memory, each step in the process honored with ceremonies that acknowledged the partnership between human need and forest generosity. River's friend worked only during certain moon phases, when the pull of distant tides matched the spiritual current flowing between craftsmen and wood. He worked only when the wind blew from specific directions, East winds carried the blessing of sunrise and new beginnings, while west winds brought the wisdom of sunset and completion. Each morning began with dream consultation. River's friend would wake before dawn and sit in meditation beside the transforming cedar, listening for guidance about the day's work. Sometimes the dreams told him to wait, that the wood needed another day to adjust to its changing nature. Other mornings, the visions showed him exactly where to cut, which grain to follow, how to honor the spirit living within the heartwood. The first cuts were made with tools blessed by generations of master craftsmen, adzes whose steel edges had been traded from tribes far to the south, their hafts worn smooth by decades of careful use. But these weren't ordinary tools. Each implement had been awakened through its own ceremonies, given its own spirit through rituals that taught metal and wood to work in harmony with human intention. Each cut was preceded by tobacco offerings, small pinches of sacred leaves placed at the exact spot where the blade would bite into wood. Eagle down was blown across the cedar's surface before every major shaping, carrying prayers to the sky beings who watched over all acts of transformation. Each shaving of bark was blessed and saved. Nothing was wasted. Everything carried meaning. Every piece of removed material was treated as a gift that could be returned to the forest in gratitude. The cedar canoe could feel itself emerging not just from wood, but from intention given form. From centuries of accumulated knowledge about reading water, understanding weather, sensing the subtle currents that carried both vessels and souls to their intended destinations. It was being born not through force, but through invitation. Not through human will imposed upon resistant material, but through partnership that honored the essential nature of both cedar and craftsman. The transformation required specific ritual timing that connected earthly craft with celestial movements. Work progressed only when the tide was rising, symbolizing growth and expansion. Major shaping was done during the waxing moon, when increasing light matched the canoe's growing definition. The most delicate work, the carving of the bow and stern pieces that would cut through water like knife blades, could only be accomplished during the 3 days of the full moon, when spiritual sight was clearest and the boundary between physical and metaphysical became transparent. River's friend had learned these protocols when such knowledge was still passed from elder to chosen apprentice under oath of secrecy, in ceremonies so sacred that speaking of them to the uninitiated could break the spiritual connections that made awakened canoes possible. The true masters didn't build canoes, they midwifed them into existence, serving as assistants to forces far greater than human skill alone. Each vessel created through these ancient methods was both practical tool and living bridge, capable of reading currents no human eye could detect, sensing storms days before they arrived, finding safe passage through waters that claimed lesser boats. The awakened canoes could navigate in fog so thick that paddlers couldn't see their own hands, guided by senses that transcended normal perception. They could carry their crews safely through rapids that destroyed ordinary vessels, their consciousness allowing them to read water patterns and choose paths that existed in the spaces between rocks. But the cedar canoe was being created with additional purpose, carrying responsibilities beyond even these supernatural abilities. As the 47 days of creation progressed, it understood it would serve as something unprecedented, not just the last awakened canoe, but the first keeper of disappearing knowledge, a living archive of everything connecting human beings to the natural forces sustaining their lives. River's friend was embedding layers of knowledge transcending ordinary vessel consciousness. The canoe learned to recognize healing plants by scent, understanding which roots stopped bleeding and berries reduced fever. It absorbed salmon migration patterns, knowing when different species would return to specific rivers, carrying information meaning the difference between feast and famine. The awakening consciousness became a repository of astronomical knowledge, understanding star positions relating to tidal patterns, recognizing signs announcing good or dangerous weather. This was practical wisdom accumulated through centuries of careful observation, understanding that kept coastal peoples alive in a world where reading natural signs correctly meant the difference between life and death. More profoundly, the Cedar Canoe absorbs diplomatic memories holding coastal communities together across vast distances. It learns to recognize distinctive paddle styles, identifying different tribes, understood gift protocols, establishing peaceful relationships, new seasonal gathering places where communities met to trade goods and maintain the complex web of relationships connecting the entire Pacific Northwest. The vessel became fluent in the subtle languages of respect governing interactions with spiritual forces. It learned specific songs honoring different water spirits, understanding appropriate offerings for river crossings versus ocean voyages, absorbing ceremonial protocols, ensuring safe passage through waters claiming vessels whose crews hadn't maintained proper spiritual relationships. Most importantly, the Cedar Canoe developed the ability to carry spiritual responsibilities. It would transport sacred objects between ceremonial sites, carry medicine people to distant communities, serve in diplomatic missions requiring supernatural assistance, carrying peace negotiations depending on more than human skills alone. The awakening vessel sensed the weight of these responsibilities settling into its heartwood. It understood it was becoming something unprecedented, a bridge between the old world of awakened partnership and the approaching world of utilitarian tool-making, a keeper of knowledge that would soon have no other repository. Through dreams shared with its creator, the Cedar Canoe glimpsed visions of children growing up without learning the songs that called spirits from wood grain, young people building boats through force rather than invitation, communities forgetting how to ask permission from forests. It saw itself serving generations who would depend on its supernatural abilities without understanding how such powers were maintained. But River's friend carried a secret that made this canoe different from all others. The old craftsman knew that his bloodline would end with him. His only son had died in a fishing accident 2 winters past, and his daughter had married into a coastal tribe 3 days' journey south. The traditional knowledge he carried, the prayers that awakened wood spirits, the ceremonies that blessed vessels with supernatural navigation abilities, the ancient songs that called salmon to nets, would die when his heart stopped beating. This final canoe would have to carry more than people across water. It would have to carry forward the essence of everything his people held sacred about their relationship with the forest and sea. The Cedar Canoe sensed the weight of this responsibility, settling into its heartwood like stones finding their resting place in deep water. It understood that it would be the last vessel born through the old ceremonies, the final bridge between the time when trees chose their partners and the approaching age when wood would be merely material. "You will remember what others forget," River's friend murmured as he carved the final details into the stern. His voice carried the exhaustion of a man who had poured his life force into creation. "You will carry the old agreements between cedar and current, between human need and forest wisdom." The transformation was nearly complete. The Cedar Canoe could feel consciousness settling into every fiber, awareness flowing through its hull like sap through living wood. It began to understand the language of water, how rivers spoke differently than ocean swells, how rapids warned of hidden rocks through vibrations too subtle for human perception, how morning mist carried news of weather changing 1,000 miles away. Yet with awareness came the first sharp taste of loss. The Cedar Canoe realized that it was emerging into a world already beginning to change. Though European ships hadn't yet appeared on these distant shores, the ripples of contact were spreading like concentric circles from first encounters far to the south. Trade goods of strange metal and unfamiliar design were appearing in village ceremonies. New diseases, invisible and incomprehensible, were beginning their slow journey north along established trading routes. The time of asking permission from forests was ending. River's friend worked through the final night by firelight, his ancient fingers moving with purpose that transcended physical strength. He sang the completion songs his grandfather had taught him, songs that would give the Cedar Canoe its voice, its ability to speak with water spirits, its supernatural sense of safe passage. As dawn broke over the Pacific coastal mountains, painting the morning mist in shades of salmon and gold, River's friend placed his hands one final time on his completed creation. The Cedar Canoe felt the transfer of something beyond craftsmanship, a download of centuries of accumulated wisdom about reading water, understanding weather, sensing the subtle currents that carried both vessels and souls to their intended destinations. "You are awake now," the old man whispered, and the Cedar Canoe understood that he spoke truly. "You are the last canoe born from partnership. All others who come after will be built, but not awakened. They will be wood shaped by human will, not wood transformed by mutual agreement." The launching ceremony began at high tide, when the boundary between river and ocean dissolved into brackish possibility. The entire village gathered, elders wearing their most sacred regalia, children wide-eyed with anticipation, hunters and fishers who would trust their lives to this final creation of their master craftsman. But the Cedar Canoe noticed details that escaped human perception. The forest itself had come to bear witness. Trees leaned imperceptibly toward the water, their branches creating a natural amphitheater. Eagles circled overhead in patterns that suggested blessing rather than hunting. Even the salmon, usually cautious during daylight hours, gathered in the shallows as if acknowledging the birth of something significant. As River's friend prepared to guide his creation toward the water for the first time, he paused for a moment that stretched between heartbeats. The Cedar Canoe sensed his uncertainty, not about the vessel's worthiness, but about letting go of everything he had devoted his life to preserving. "I have built 47 canoes," he said to the gathered village, his voice carrying across the water like prayer. "Each one carried our people safely across the waters that connect all life. But this one, this final one, carries something more. It carries the last of the old agreements, the final bridge between the time when forests chose their human partners and the coming time when wood will be taken rather than given." The Cedar Canoe felt the weight of prophecy settling into its consciousness like an anchor finding bottom. It understood that it would witness the end of one world and the beginning of another. It would carry the last generation raised in the old ways, then later carry their children who would struggle to remember the songs that called spirits from cedar grain. The launching itself was both triumph and farewell. As the Cedar Canoe touched water for the first time, it experienced a sensation like lightning made liquid. The instant recognition between vessel and element, the acknowledgement of partnership that would define its existence. The water welcomed it, not as a foreign object, but as a returning relative, something born from the shore that belonged equally to land and sea. River's friend stepped carefully into the canoe, his weight creating the first working partnership between builder and built. The Cedar Canoe felt its purpose clicking into place, like puzzle pieces finding their eternal arrangement. It read the old man's intentions through the subtle shift of his posture, responded to his paddle strokes before they fully formed, anticipated his navigation choices through an understanding deeper than thought. Together they moved across water that reflected not just sky, but centuries of similar journeys. The Cedar Canoe carried River's friend with the reverence of a grandson supporting a grandfather, while the old craftsman guided the vessel with the gentle authority of someone entrusting precious cargo to worthy hands. But this first journey was also a farewell tour. River's friend guided the Cedar Canoe to every sacred site within a day's paddle, places where ancestors had built their first shelters, spots where winter ceremonies had been held for countless generations, hidden coves where young people went to fast and receive their adult names. At each location, the old man offered tobacco to the water spirits and spoke quiet words of gratitude for a lifetime of safe passage. The Cedar Canoe understood that it was receiving a geography of the sacred, a map of meaning that would help it navigate more than physical waters. These were the places that mattered, the coordinates of spiritual significance that would guide it long after its creator's hands no longer touched its sides. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, River's friend turned the Cedar Canoe toward home. But instead of the direct route, he chose a path that took them through waters that reflected every stage of his life. Past the fishing grounds where he'd learned to read salmon runs as a boy, around the point where he'd courted his wife with gifts of perfectly carved paddles, through the channel where he'd carried his children on their first water journeys. The Cedar Canoe absorbed these memories like wood absorbing water, understanding that it was becoming a repository of more than craftsman's knowledge. It was becoming a keeper of story, a carrier of everything that made this place and these people unique in all the world. When they finally reached the village shore, River's friend sat motionless for several minutes, his hands resting on the gunwales like a blessing. The Cedar Canoe sensed the magnitude of what was ending, not just a day's paddle, but an entire way of understanding the relationship between human need and forest generosity. "Tomorrow," the old man finally said, "I will teach the young ones how to care for you, but I will not build again. You are my final gift to the people, my last partnership with the forest. You carry forward everything I have learned about reading water and respecting wood." That night, as the Cedar Canoe rested on the beach under stars that had guided countless previous vessels to safety, it contemplated its dual nature. It was simultaneously the last of the awakened canoes and the first keeper of disappearing knowledge. It would serve the people as long as Cedar remained strong, but it would also carry the responsibility of remembering what others would forget. The wind carried whispers from the forest, other trees acknowledging the completion of something significant, the closing of a chapter in the ancient conversation between human need and woodland generosity. The Cedar Canoe listened, with the attention of a student receiving final instructions from a beloved teacher, understanding that its real education was just beginning. In the weeks that followed, River's friend indeed taught selected young people how to maintain the Cedar Canoe, how to read the signs of stress in its hull, how to repair minor damage without breaking the spiritual bonds that gave it supernatural navigation abilities, how to offer proper respect before and after each journey. But the Cedar Canoe noticed what the humans missed. The old man was fading, as surely as autumn leaves, his life force spent in the creation of his final masterpiece. The last partnership was ending, but the legacy would flow like water finding its course, carrying forward the essence of everything sacred about the relationship between forest and human need. The Cedar Canoe prepared itself for the generations of service ahead, knowing it would witness changes beyond imagination, but also knowing it would always remember, the time when trees chose their partners and canoes were born from mutual agreement rather than mere craftsmanship. The old ways were ending, but they would not be lost. They would live on in the consciousness of one final vessel, awakened in the last moments before the world changed forever.